I naturally came to comic books because I was in France, and I've been raised in France. And when you draw and when you want to tell stories, the only way you can, earn your living or do a job about drawing would be to go in comic books, because it's very strong in France. Comic books is the major thing. Animation is not really very important in France. So since I was a kid, I've been thinking of being a comic book artist, and then I managed to go to a comic book school, and I started to do comic books, and I did my own comic books as an artist and a scenarist. And then because I was doing animation and I was drawing in animation for my living, I couldn't draw in comic books. So therefore I stayed in comic books as a scenarist. But then as soon as I started to really enjoy animation, I've left comic books because I'm not interested in it very much, because I think there's so many things about a film which you don't find in comic books, and I really I'd be very miserable not to go back to comic books, thinking that there's nothing about the sound or the music. I love music, I love the sound, and it's very interesting for me to be able to express myself with also the sound and the music, as well as the picture. So after the comic book school, I needed to find a job, and I really didn't want to go in animation because it was a bit strange and foreign to me. Animation, a bit difficult to access, a bit technical. I'm not very good in techniques, so I always thought that animation was just techniques. So I went to England and I started to. I wanted to become an illustrator, and I couldn't find any job as an illustrator. So I went to an animation studio called Richard Purdon Productions, where I actually started to work with some very good animators like Dick Purdon and Michael Dudok de Witt, people like Paul de Meyer or Dirk van de Wandels, a lot of with different styles and very good animators and a very good spirit in animation. And I've learned the job, how to learn to draw as an animator and to express myself as an animator with these people, working on commercials mainly. And after that, I came back to France, started The Old Lady and the Pigeons, and then it didn't go very well. So there was no budget to finish the film. So I moved to Canada to carry on doing commercials. And I stayed there for 10 years. And during these 10 years, I managed to finish The Old Lady and Pigeon and do the Triplets of Belleville. So it was very useful for me to be. I wanted to be in a place where I could actually, that people would understand me as an animator, which I've never found that in France. It's very difficult to explain to people what you are doing, and it's a very small world in France. Everybody knows each other, and they don't have the same sort of mentalities. The one I found mainly in England, which is like this very artisanal way of thinking, the way you teach the young people who start, you really help them to become animators. The idea of Belleville Rendez-vous is mainly it got something to do with the animation mainly, because I wanted to see some of the characters I've been thinking a long time about, and really wanted to animate. And it's like I would say it's like an actor who's got ideas of characters, and you want to make a film where he's going to see all these characters in. That would be like a bit like Jacques Tati was doing his films. He was mainly collecting characters which he wanted to see on the screen, and then start to find a story to put them together. So the story in itself is just a way of showing all these characters and seeing them moves, and that's basically what the Triplet is about. Now, for example, it's really like the three triplets, the sisters, the huge old ladies. I always wanted to have, because I did the first film with a very tiny and fragile old lady. I wanted to do the contrary this time, to have old ladies be very, very, very strong, and I really wanted to animate them so they would look like a bit like old ladies, you know, in the way they dress and the way they express themselves, but at the same time in their bodies there would be some very strong, like African basket players, for example, or you know, and also, you know, I think they're black inside. I really think that the triplets are black inside. And at the same time, they play jazz, they jam, they improvise. It's a bit like the bebop jazz players in the 60s. And I always had that in mind. So that, for example, that is really then the main story is very simple. For the triplets especially, it's been I would say from the original idea to the finish, that would be 5 years, and that would be involving, I would say, 300 people overall, but I would say like mainly 50-60 people during the 5 years regularly, and we will have quite a strong budget, because it's very expensive to do an animated film, because nothing is there, so you have to create everything. Every single thing you see on the screen have to be created. We had some trouble because mainly we didn't have the whole budget when we started the film, which is always a problem, because the producer had to search for more money during the film, and it's a sort of it's a bit there was a lot of anxiety with that, you know, that maybe we would never be able to finish the film. But otherwise, you know, I think we had the means. We didn't have it at the beginning, we had it at the end. We managed to finish it. That's the main point. So the cartoon was mainly the main studio. It was a three production in one. So there was Didier Brunner, the main producer in France, and then there was a co-producer in Canada, and Viviane van Vleuteren in Belgium. So the main studio was in Montreal, but there was a lot of French people over to work on the animation, and then we had to work with some 3D was done in Angoulême, and some 3D was done in Belgium, and some 2D also was done in Belgium, especially with Benoît Ferromont, who's been mainly doing the crowds in Belleville and the opening sequence. And we had another studio in Latvia, where they were actually doing the in-betweens in Riga. So all the in-betweens were sent over there. All the keys were sent there. They were doing the in-betweens and sending back to us. So I was spending a lot of my time, you know, on internet and checking, approving things with internet. I think most of the characters on this film are inspired by people I've known personally, or I've just, you know, met or spotted in the street, or which people I've heard of. You know, like the triplets. I always think that they're inspired by my grandmother from my mother's side. Was a very full of color character, a very strong woman, and I've never met her. I mean, I've met her when I was very small, but everything, you know, everybody told things about her and the way she was, and she was a lovely person, very, very big heart, and probably the triplet is a bit of her. And otherwise, you know, the dog Bruno is really a dog I spotted in a street in Montpellier, and he was an absolutely enormous fat dog, and he was sitting he was lying on a place where you've got a restaurant around, and he actually belonged to one of the restaurants, and he obviously had all the remains from the food, and that's why he was absolutely utterly fat. And he had this it was really amazing. It was a big inspiration for me, because he had this shaky, very, very tiny, skinny little legs, and he was always shaky like that. And he would seem to be a very fragile animal, but in fact, everybody was scared of him. Champion is actually the first ever character I've drawn for this film and for this story with the cyclist. The first drawing I did, and that was, and very bizarrely, he actually kept his look the same for all during the film, which most of the characters have really evaluated with the, you know, when you pass them to animators and things like that, and with the time they change, they get a bit like more ripe. And Champion was the character I've drawn, and he was a mechanic, and he was working in a garage, and he was repairing some car. I remember very well the drawings, and there was Bruno in a corner of the, and that was the first drawing I did, and I never moved very much. Then I had to put it, as a bike racer, so I have to show his legs and things like that. I found it was very funny to animate his calves, which you can do in animation, not in live action, but you can have his calves, having their lives on their own, and every time he put his foot on the ground, he just go like wobbly like that, and everything is actually you think that all his secrets are in his calves, and he's a very touching character because he's a character that doesn't say a word during the thing, and you actually think he's mute. In a very bizarre way. I always think that the other characters can speak. I always hear them speak, even if they don't. But I always think that this character is mute. But very funnily, at the end of the film, he's the only one to talk. And that's probably why I think it's a bit touching at the end that the only character who actually talks and has something to say is this character. Oh, and he's an orphan, yeah. He's an orphan because I am an orphan myself, and I was an orphan during the film. So you can be an orphan very late. And mainly I wanted to have a special relation with his grandmother, and I thought it was like a lot of people are raised or used to be raised by their grandmothers, and I think a lot of people from generation of the 30 years old have a very strong relation with their grandmother, because most of the time the mother was very busy working, and then the grandmother was in charge of the kids, and she's been raising the kids most of the time. Which now is changing a bit, because obviously the grandmother are working still. So it's the grandmother now is going to be like doing this relation. And I had some people were really touched, and they said I had a grandmother like that, and I think Madame Souza, and it's the relation with the grandmother and the grandchild, and it's like a bit of universal relation. Madame Souza is more of an idea I had, I don't know why, of a Portuguese lady with a club foot. And originally I had this idea for a comic books, even a novel. And she was a young, very attractive Portuguese lady, always dressed in black, but with a club foot. And when at one point we had to change the main character, who was the old lady at the beginning, and to find absolutely new characters for the feature, I had this idea, and I couldn't have her being very pretty, and it would have been a bit weird in the context next to the other characters, and that's where she actually came from, that long idea, and it was for her actually. I had this idea a long time ago for something I didn't even know I was going to do. So, but I always like to keep these characters hanging around and take them sometime when they. I think the fact that the characters are quite convincing, and also probably because they had lives on their own. And they're not just characters who just appears and do some silly things and just receive a piano on their hand and just pop back again, and they're already. These characters were very fragile, and they had childhood. They'd been child. They had a story before. Madame Souza had a story. We don't know what happened to her, but she's a widow. She lives in the suburb of Paris, and this little kid is an orphan. What happened to his parents? And then at the end of the film is the same thing. Time has passed, and some characters are missing because obviously they're not living anymore. And that's probably why there's a sort of melancholy that the characters are not invincible. They're just like us. They live, they suffer, they exist, and they can have scratch, and they can they're not supernatural. My style in animation, I would say it's coming straight from the 101 Dalmatians period, Disney, the Aristocats, Jungle Books, and all these periods, like when Disney Studio had this team of always the same people who were working together since Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. and who actually ended working on their films in around the 70s, and I've learned a lot about, you know, what they taught us about animation, the way the character should move, but then I also developed something a bit different too, because I am not. I try not to act too much like in the Disney style, when the characters, I would say, are a bit overacting. I mean, I would say these days are a bit overacting. They were not overacting at all in the 50s or 60s. But I try to be a bit more working on the timing of the characters, and sometimes just like, I think what I really learned in England, which is also a different style from North American style, everything is based on the timing. Sometimes you can have some a character that doesn't do anything, and then just a little gesture, and it makes things come to life, and it makes things funny, and it makes things sad. It depends. I had this, for example, the example which really struck me the time I saw it is Mark Baker, who did a film called the Hill Farm. And there's a brilliant scene when there's a woman, she's a farmer, and she got a chicken under her arm, and there are tourists around, and they are taking pictures because everything is fantastic for them, and she's just in front of them, and suddenly everybody gets quiet. And the only thing, she breaks the neck of the chicken, and it's just like a little sound, it's got like click. And then one of the tourists faint. And all the timing in that, you know, the whole story is not very funny like that, but the whole timing makes it really hilarious, and that's the sort of thing I like in animation. You don't need to have too many drawings to make a nice animation. My influences for the Triplets is more, I would say, more live action films than it is with animated films. And in the way of telling stories, or the surrealist side, or whatever, I would say that I like very much silent movies like Charlie Chaplin or Buster Keaton and Jack Tati, of course. And I like very much also very surrealistic and very baroque films like Fellini's films, and Luis Buñuel also, for the way he tells stories. I like very much the way Buñuel tells story, because you never know where you're going to go with him. It's just like he's taking you to the end, and it's very scary. And something I try to do also with the Triplets, people never know where they go. There's not really the story is not structured in a way that, you know, there's a development and a happy end and whatsoever, you know, and climax, and it's always like open. It's a bit like I would say that like Miyazaki films. I think it's. The way it tells stories is always very open and very poetic. It's not, I would say, it's not the Hollywood style of writing. All the characters mainly have geometric silhouettes because it's a silent movie and there's no dialogues, and it's very important that the characters can't be recognized with their voices. So when they're far away, or even when they appear in a scene very fast, we need to know, okay, that's this character. So the audience don't get too confused. So when they see something very small, we look like a yogurt pot, they know it's Madame Souza, and this enormous squarish character in black, they know it's the mafia, and the same thing. So. And it's also something that you can do in animation, which you can do in live action. So if, you know, it's just proper to actually drawing and caricatures and things like that. So it would be sad not to use it. I think it's by respect, because I know what animating means, and I know all the pleasure about animation. I know also what can be the inconvenience of animation when people spend 8 hours a day and 5 days a week, and sometimes 2 years on a film. It's better if they can actually put themselves into one character and really at the end say, this is my character, and in a way this is me on the screen, and this is me acting. And if they go in the theaters and they see the people reacting to their character, I'm sure they're very pleased with that, and it's the way to be recognized. And I think that's unfortunately it's not always the case. I don't think we recognize very much animators the way they should be, like real actors. We always put the actors, in front in live action, but in animation we never talk about animators very much. Yes, Bruno, one was of the character because he's a lot there. So he had two animators like Madame Souza, and what was very funny with him is the two animators on Bruno had definitely their style to animate Bruno. And as any artist who draws, you always put yourself in your drawings. And at one point, you always reflect yourself, the way you are, the way you move, especially in animation, or some your silhouette or something like that. So Bruno, there were two different Brunos for me. There was the Bruno done by Florian, and there was the other one done by Jan, and they were both very different. And like the one Florian had a very special way of smiling, and actually Florian was looking in the mirror to smile, and it reflects in Bruno's smile. And Jan's dog is a bit more of a little bit mad. And it really reflects their different personalities. I've used 3D mainly for to be able to not send all my animators in an asylum, because when you want to draw cars or bicycles or things like that, if you give that to an animator, 2D animator, he's going to become mad, and it's going to be a terrible job for him because there's no life to bring to a bicycle, and you would spend a month to make it just slightly turn. So we decided to go with 3D just to be able to show bicycles in the Tour de France, to show cars, to show motorbikes, to show boats in the harbor of Belleville, and to show traffic jams, and all of that was mainly possible with the 3D animation. But the danger was also to show something a bit too synthetic, that 3D look, like CGI will always look a bit too clean, and we wanted to be able to have the 2D animation and the 3D animation in the same film, not in two different films. So we've tried to destroy a bit the look of the CGI and make it look if it was drawn by hand, and I think it's working very well for a lot of scenes. The only problem we still have was with the sea, because the sea still looks a bit CGI, but it's very difficult to with the technology we had to make it look like drawings. The hardest scene in 3D, I think all the scenes in 3D were very hard, but I would say that the most difficult scenes, and if you say hard, that won't be like not technically hard and very enjoyable, but technically hard and not very enjoyable, that would be the cyclists, the bicycles, because we had animation of bicycles in 3D with a sort of a dummy for the character, and then we have to remove the dummy and put a drawn character on it, and that was very, very, very complicated, because you had to think of the legs were passing behind the frame, the one were in front of the frame, the wheel, and all these things, and it was very, very, very complicated. I would say that I'm very happy the film is finished now, and it's talking about cyclists and cyclists, and that's finished with that, because that took a long to do. So the integration mainly was to be able to turn the CGI into something a bit more human, and like being drawn by humans, and so we found a logicial which is actually taking the shapes of the 3D and turning into lines. The outlines are just like if it was drawn, but then these lines still are a bit stiff, so we had to go through another process, so we can just like make the lines a bit dirty and a bit wobbly, like if it was drawn by hand. So for all these elements like cars and bicycles, we don't see very much it really looks like it's been drawn by hand. And also the thing we did because it's too perfect CGI, so in the look we try to make it very dirty, but also in the animation it's too perfect, because it's animated on 24 drawings per second, which in 2D, because it's very expensive, we just do it in 12 frames per second. So 24 frames per second makes a very, very smooth movement. So we've took one drawing on 2 and make it 12 CGI drawings per second to be able to have the same sort of unquality in a way. Well, the swamp scene was difficult because in my dreams, because mainly you dream a film before you make it. This explosion was enormous, and I really wanted to see actually tons and tons of mud going in the air and have this very special shape. And I was thinking of doing everything in 2D with some effects on it, but then it really didn't work, because we found some documentation in a Pearl Harbor attack, and there was some very nice splashes, torpedoes and things like that. And we saw one of them was really massive and very dramatic. We used that in 2D. We did it in 2D and had some stuff on it, and it wasn't really satisfactory. So Peter Van Hout has added some 3D on it, so make it the liquid a bit more liquid, and then he added some particles, a lot of particles or little explosion splashes on the side. So I think at the end there's such an amazing amount of different layers just for the explosions, but definitely the result is really what we wanted to have. Belleville was something I always wanted to do, and always something I wanted to see. And like everybody actually who actually start drawing or painting or whatsoever, it's to actually to draw a city which would be a bit even bigger and madder than what the architects actually managed to create. And when you think about New York or Chicago, there's the time when I used to actually want to do worse than that. I'm gonna say worse, even bigger, and to go in craziest direction. And so directors have been doing that a lot, Metropolis, and then for me, or the City of Oz also, which I think the City of Oz looked very much like Belleville. And also for me, Belleville is very important because I spent 10 years in Montreal, and it was a way for me, because the story was taking place in North America, to say to myself, well, why not make a little homage to the city I've been living for 10 years. And there's a lot of architectural things which are from Montreal or from Quebec City, it depends. And also what about the Belleville is also a cinematographic city, which is not a city that you would be representative on a still or an illustration, because mainly the backgrounds, for me, I had first in my mind this pan, this vertical pan from the top to the harbor of Belleville, which is absolutely enormous. Absolutely enormous. It's if you take the actual background who's been created, I think it's 2 meters high, and it's almost broad like that. And you don't see that in the film, because what you see is a movement. So for me, first of all, it's a cinematographic city, and then it's all the references about Montreal and the residential areas of Montreal. The Pedalo crossing is my favorite scene because it's emotionally it's been a very surprising scene actually, because story-wise it's a bit absurd, the story of this old lady following a transatlantic on a pedalo, and also it's a very short sequence. I didn't want it to look like completely bizarre in the middle of the film and really break the rhythm of the film, so I wanted to have some nice classical music on it. But I didn't have any idea on what classical music I was going to use, so I bought a record at that time, which was the Mass in C minor of Mozart, and just the opening of this mass. The first time I've listened to it, I say, oh my god, it's so much like what I want. There was everything I wanted to put in, and it would bring some tragedy to this scene. And I've already done an animatic at that time, just shooting the pictures of the storyboard, and I've put the music on it, and it was like working perfectly with every little details in this sequence, like when the whales arrive, when the city arrives, and even the down shots where there was some special thing from the music illustrating it very well. And that was already a very big surprise. And then the animator, Alain Dumais, the 3D animator who did the sequence was working on the first shot with it's a very long shot where you see Madame Souza on the pedalo and the sea turning around the boats, and he showed me that. I said, "Whoa, that's very nice." And then we put the music on, and then we look at each other, and we just had this very, 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 very touched by it. A lot of emotion was going through it. And after that, it just went getting bigger and bigger every time that we would add any sort of details in the sequence, and the coming in, the arrival in Belleville, and that is pure magic. Sort of things that you don't really think about, and it just comes. That it's just like a nice present. And there's also the crossing is also a bit of like telling a bit of my life, because I did myself this crossing, fortunately not with a pedalo but with a plane, and it's when I moved from France to North America to Canada, which I stayed there for a long time, and so it's like taking everything you've got from your own country and then move to another country, and it's a bit of a fracture at one point, and that's why this moment every time reminds me a bit of that. So I would say that that's also the touching point. Because I've been living a long time outside of France, and been living in England or in Canada, and I was really amused by the way that the people outside France, where the French would behave, and they especially Anglo-Saxon people, got really big clichés about the French people, and they would think that we are wearing onion necks and wearing berets and just biking, and they have actually a vision of the French people that might have been possibly true in the 40s or something like that, and all the thing about the food, that French people would eat absolutely disgusting things, little slimy animals or very cute animals like rabbits, for example, and I wanted to play with that because I think it's very funny. I was even playing with that when I was living in England, like pretending to propose frog legs to people to a party, and they were actually fake frog legs. They were enormous, and just playing with that just to shock them. Well, yes, I'm French, of course, but at the same time, I think I've got a lot of Anglo-Saxon things, which I mean that all my experience in working in animation and all the humor, I think I'm much closer to the Monty Python than I'm close to Louis de Funès, for example. Which I like Louis de Funès, but I think I'd be much closer to the Monty Python. The sort of going in directions which are completely insane. And
I had at different stages of the film. I had different roles. In the beginning, I was working in the layout department, designing the look of the locations, the setting of every single scene. We have about 1,200 scenes in the film, so each one of them had to be addressed separately. There are a few reuses, of course, but altogether we have about 800 and between 800 and 900 original backgrounds, which means as many separate and different designs. So designing the settings, coming up with the concept was my initial role. Supervising the team of the layout artists. I had 2 more artists involved in this, working with me. After the layouts were accomplished, I took over the color department, coloring the backgrounds, the decor, the settings again, taking care of the look, the overall ambience, the color rhythm, the atmosphere of each different sequence. Lots of discussions with Sylvain, and it's creative and at the same time very technical work. I had to cover lots of bases. We spoke, it was a long and interactive process. It's not like he gave me all the directions in the beginning and I had to go on my own. When I say it was an interactive process, we are in constant communication with him. If I have an idea, I'll share it with him. If he had ideas, sometimes we change the concept and the ideas along the way during the process, usually for better, because sometimes while working you realize that something that you thought would work doesn't, or you have a better idea. So we spoke mostly about the ambience and the feeling he wanted to achieve from the decors, from the backgrounds. He didn't really control me very closely. He gave me a lot of freedom. When he knew exactly what he wanted, he'll articulate it, he will delegate it to me, and I'll try to match his feelings. It was quite fruitful and good collaboration. Which one was the hardest background? There are a lot of backgrounds that were hard to make. I can think of a particular one, a big multiplan with arched camera movement. I'll describe the background. It was a scene shortly after Madame Souza's and Bruno's arrival in Belleville. It's a morning scene, and the camera starts from a traffic light on the street. I remember street crossing where Madame Souza is riding Bruno and waiting to cross the street. And shortly after that there is a big pan following, starting from Madame Souza and ending up with a zoom in on French wine center, focusing on the bottle on top of the building. So this scene was quite difficult to come up with because of the camera movement. All the buildings had to be drawn in very unusual and strange perspective. And we had 5 overlays, 5 different layers of buildings moving with different speed to create the feeling of space, because the buildings which were closer to the camera eventually to us were moving faster, and they were under a different angle than the buildings following them, and so on and so on. And behind them I had a huge panoramic rendering of Belleville. And we had to draw a small sketch of this background, shoot it and compose the scene and run it through the final compositing software, US Animation, to make sure that the scene will work, because it's one thing to picture it in your head, but after everything is drawn and a lot of time is invested in drawing and painting this very time-consuming and detailed decor, if you find out at the end that something's not working, you have to go back and redo everything from scratch. So for this particular scene we had to check it with the final product, like the final compositing software. It worked. I had to spend a lot of time drawing though, because it's a very detailed, huge panoramic picture of Belleville. And I can pretty much say that this is one of the most challenging decors to draw. Can't say really that I have a favorite background. Some of the favorite backgrounds are maybe the ones that took the most sweat and work from us. This is the vertical panoramic shot of, again, the first introduction to Belleville, shortly after the storm sequence. You don't really enjoy it fully in the film. I wish it was presented more nicely, but it's a bit selfish, because the backgrounds work for the film as long as they work in the context of the entire film. But it's a visually nice background. A few people worked on it at different stages of the film, and I had to finalize everything, the drawing and the color as well. The background that I mentioned earlier, the arrival in Belleville, the panoramic shot, it's a nice background too. Quite a few panoramic night scenes in Belleville, I like them, but I don't really have one favorite background. When we arrive in Belleville, I'm going kind of chronologically through the film, it was a bit more of a free ride. I had more freedom there. The objective was to create a city that exists, that conveys the feeling of real existing city, but it doesn't resemble anything that exists in reality. So it was a compilation between Paris, New York and Montreal, with a lot of Baroque elements. So it was the most fun part for me because I was less restricted by real existing artifacts or small details that I had to research. I just had to come up with a new style that doesn't look eclectic and like mechanical amalgam of existing styles. My visual references came from a lot of photographic material from France, Paris and Tour de France from this period, this time period. I would mention a couple of names, like photographs very well known, like Robert Doisneau, Jean Monique. We had to go through a lot of photographic materials, a lot of libraries. Library material was checked for the period. As I said, we had to draw things that existed. If we stylized them, they had to be stylized within the parameters that they can still convey the idea and the feeling of really existing set or ambience. So it's mostly, I'll summarize it, it's mostly photographic material, black and white, from that period of time. We came across a great book of photographs from Paris, details from Paris, black and white photographs from Jean Monique. We saw it in a bookstore in Montreal. We had to buy it immediately, and it proved to be very helpful. It had a lot of details, more backyards, houses, doors, window frames, cracked walls, sewages, gutters, everything that can bring this feeling of this real feeling that was my objective in the film. Personally, I was very persistent, and I really wanted this to convey this feeling of real ambience. Or I hope nobody can notice when there is distortion of perspective. But if I have to give examples of distortion of backgrounds or perspective, distortion of the perspective, which scenes would I use? I would use again maybe the most complicated, at least from my experience, it was the most complicated scene, the panoramic shot of Belleville. But not the first one, not the vertical pan that goes straight from up to down and ends up with the obese Statue of Liberty. The one that follows shortly after and zooms in on the bottle on top of the French Wine Center. That one has pretty radical distortion and unusual perspective, yet you don't really see it in the final scene, because when we're doing the distortion, as I said, we have to consider what you see at every given moment in the frame. But the background is much larger than the actual frame, because the camera, the frame moves through the background. That one is quite distorted. There is another scene that I looked for a deliberate distortion. It's under the bridge in Belleville, when Madame Souza is sitting beside her, alone beside her tiny campfire, and there is a distant panoramic shot starting from Madame Souza's camping site under the bridge, and the camera moves up, ending up with a like panoramic view of night Belleville on the background of the night sky. There is also a deliberate perspective distortion in this background, because the camera was not supposed to go up, like following the height of the of the background, it had to move the angle only, going from the point of view of the viewer, just moving the angle up. So you had to represent this exaggeration and transition of the perspective in the drawing. Yet, as I said, you don't see it in the final scene in the film. But if you look at the drawings, at the drawing and the actual background, it might look a bit unusual. If I have to describe my input in the sequence of the storm and the ocean crossing, it started with working on a few color sketches. Actually, I had to come up with color schemes for each scene, starting from the storm, then the smooth transition towards the morning and the foggy scene, and then the arrival in Belleville. I think I had to create about 7 or 8 different color keys to make sure that they convey and they deliver the needed mood. We confirmed them with Sylvain, and he was the driving force, and he was the inspiration behind this scene, and he was the one explaining what he was expecting from this scene. The 3D animators were working in close relation with him, and particularly on the second part, the morning sequence with the fog. They worked with me too, and I had to tell them my opinion, where to reduce the fog, how to break the sunbeams, and how to achieve the needed atmosphere and impression visually. But it's mostly 3D sequence, which was nicely blended into the film, and I think it worked fine.